I want to thank you all for coming and sharing this wonderful event in Homer with us all. But mostly, I want to thank the person who's responsible for the second greatest hoax in history. Marshal, the artist who created the Cardiff Giant and this extravaganza that folks in Syracuse, Homer, and Central New York have been enjoying for actually well over a month as the story started. So let's give Ty a round of applause.
Wonderful.
Ty, a little bit about what inspired you to do this.
Sure, let me get my thinking cap
And let me
on.
get my camera so I can picture it.
I was actually living in Beacon, New York at the time. My partner and I were running a gallery out of our home, and the home was a storefront. So upstairs was this old storefront, and downstairs was the living space. So we moved in and said, geez, wouldn't it be interesting to look at art and how it looks in a house, because that's where we hang art. So instead of in a white wall, very stoic gallery, we kind of did it with couches and chairs, just like this, except with art on the walls. And I was being born and raised in Syracuse, watching online about the revitalization efforts of Central New York as a region generally, and also the cleanup of Onondaga Lake. And I was very excited about that because I've lived close to Onondaga Lake all my life, and it's always been polluted. It's always been something that's been poo-pooed as the dirtiest lake, it's terrible, whatever. It's a waste. Couldn't fish in it, couldn't swim in it. So I was watching that and getting excited. You know, to clean this up, to say with our technology within 30 to 40 years that it will be clean enough to fish, clean enough to swim in, and upon moving back a year ago, seeing 15 eagles on the bank of the lake is so promising to me.
Wonderful.
So I turned to Derek and said, you know, maybe I should do a hoax in the lake as an artistic thing, so people will then pay more attention to it, and maybe create new mythology. I said maybe it could be a big tail floating out there when people are driving home, or I don't know, some glowing lights from the bottom of the lake. Or look, did you see those lights?
Yeah.
Did you see those? So I started researching. This was about 2 years ago. Folklores, mythology, and kind of strange history of Central New York, and I stumbled on the story of the Cardiff Giant. And the more I read, the more I became enamored. And the more I convinced myself that we already have our own Loch Ness, or our own Bigfoot is rather the better way to say it. And even though it was a hoax, it's still a 10-foot tall stone man. So I then began my quest to awaken the giant, which he's woken regionally, which is great. And that's really how the inspiration came about. As I went on and started talking to more people and saying, hey, have you ever heard about this Cardiff Giant? People my age and up would say, yes, of course, I saw it when I was a kid, or we went to the museum in Cooperstown to see it when I was young, or, and then people my age and younger would look at me blankly. Cardiff Giant, on earth is that?
Right.
So I thought it was important at this stage in history to recreate the giant, to portray our history. I'm not upset by any means that the giant rests in Cooperstown. In fact, I'm happy that that curator, back in the 30s, I believe it was, you know, acquired the giant and kept him on display. In fact, a 142-year-old sculpture that it is now has been on display almost its entire life. With that being said, I then discovered that Homer had a replica and started hearing from other parts of the country that, oh, we're in Iowa and we have a replica too. So I began the building of the replica, and it's really turned into a huge regional collaborative event. For that I couldn't be more blessed. A lot of positive support. And like I said, the best thing is we did reach the children. A lot of school groups. In fact, today we just talked with the Ryder School 9th graders who came to the Homer Center for the Arts. Me and Tom Hishak, a professor at Cortland of theater history. So they had a writer and an artist talking about the Cardiff Giant today, and every kid has been enamored. So there's been hundreds who've seen him over the last few weeks, and just the looks on their faces have been the most pleasing part of this. And the idea that one day they'll turn to their children and say, have you ever heard of the Cardiff Giant? So that's the best part, and that was my hope. And it's nice to be able to realize the dream. Now I got to start thinking of some new things. Does anybody have any questions about the project, or?
Not by Cardiff. Why did it end up in Cooperstown?
Well, after the popularity of the giant faded, it kind of ended up in a barn outside of Boston in Massachusetts. Boston was the last place it was shown, and audiences waned. They, by then they had made over $1 million in their money in that day, which is equivalent to $100,000 to $200,000 on the Giant. And it was sitting in this barn, and then it was sold to a private buyer who used it in his game room, and then just kind of like in his billiard room, kind of put it in there as a wacky oddity. And then it was the curator, I forget his name right now, of the Cooperstown Museum, the Farmers Museum, which I implore you to take a day trip and go. It's really amazing. He negotiated with the private owner and said, really, this is a real unusual and unique piece of New York history. We'd like it for the Farmers Museum. Of course, he was also discovered on a farm, William Stubby Newell's farm in Cardiff, of course. And so that's how it returned to New York and into the state's possession. And I don't know, I just felt like Central New York needed a replica, particularly Syracuse. Like I said, Homer has one. The Giant will be on display at the atrium at City Hall Commons in Syracuse. I like to say 3 giant footsteps away from where he was originally shown in Syracuse when David Hannum owned him. It's actually just across the way. Right now the State Tower building is there. It used to be the Bastable block, and there was an exhibition hall. And they'd actually stop the train, let people off, and for $1 you could see the Giant and get back on the train and head back down to Binghamton or New York, or wherever you might be going. And that's how I think they also got thousands of people a week to see this thing as well. So he's on display tomorrow from 11 to 5, Saturday from 11 to 3, and Monday, Halloween, a great day to see the Giant, from 11 to 5 as well. Not only that, but I put together a cabinet of curiosities, which is also on display with the Giant. That includes a 3,000-year-old mummified hand brought back by Dr. John Van Dyne when he went on an archaeological dig in 1907 over in Egypt, Thebes. We have a 33-pound meteorite, a book of Psalms, which is very perfect for this piece, from 1820. So it's even older than the Giant. And some other oddities that I'll leave secret, so you can come up and check it out.
I'm curious, how close is your original fake to the original fake?
Everybody jokes, it's a fake of a fake of a fake. I made some artistic adjustments. The original replicator was named C.F. Otto, and he lived on Syracuse's near west side on Holland Street. He was a professor of art and a bust sculptor. So I've been looking around Syracuse and Central New York for, say, a bust of an old judge or something that maybe he created. Haven't found it yet. But when P.T. Barnum hired the artist to make the replica, that was a local artist. And that's also was part of my inspiration. And that's also why I chose to bury my Giant in Lipe Art Park, which is on Syracuse's near west side, about 4 blocks away from where he created the replica. So I forgot your question, but how close is the original? I made some adjustments. I widened his shoulders a bit. The head of the Giant, anatomically speaking, is the size of a 14-foot tall man. And sculptors even in that day said, wait a minute, his head's a little big for his body, and so are his feet. So I widened his shoulders a bit so he looked a little bit more balanced. I left his bottom a bit more flat than the original, which was rounded. Really so it would be easier for us to move him, so we could easily just lift him and move him, because we're deadlifting it. The original Giant weighed 2,990 pounds. It was pure gypsum. My Giant weighs about 600 or 700 pounds, so we came in way under. Yeah, so I would say that I also, I played with his face a little bit. The nose and the eyes are all the same dimensions. He's 10 feet 4.5 inches. His arm is 4 feet long, just according to the original dimensions. I also took measurements when we were at the Farmers Museum to see if that was right. But I made his face look a little bit, has an essence of the Easter Island sculptures, because people made conjectures that this was an ancient sculpture. So a little tongue-in-cheek on my part, I made him look like a little bit Easter Island, just to reflect that ancient sculpture idea. But those were generally the only changes I made. And C.F. Otto even made changes. He elongated P.T. Barnum's because of the 14-foot sized head thing, the anatomical misconception. His were also made out of plaster. I made mine out of hypertufa, which is a mix of Portland cement, peat moss, and perlite, which are those little white specks you see in poinsettias around the holidays that make your soil stay moist. It creates a lightweight concrete that's equally as durable. So if you ever want to make a planter or something that you want to have to move around your yard with ease, hypertufa is the answer. And then I went over them with some Portland cement to smooth them out, and kind of put little pores in just like they did in the olden days, and then sealed them with concrete sealing so he would handle being under the ground. I actually, more than the sculpture, which I refer to as my set piece, jokingly of course, was the action of burying the giant and then unearthing him 142 years exactly to the date that he was unearthed on Newell's farm. About a week later, there's two reports that it stayed on the farm for 7 to 10 days, and then there's other reports that say that it stayed on the farm until the snow flied. So the snow's flying today, it could have possibly been a week or two. So they exhumed him, loaded him on a 4-horse cart and brought him to Syracuse because he was 3,000 pounds. And then put him on display in Hanover Square. And I did the same thing. This past Sunday, I hired a horseman to bring his 2 Belgian draft horses to the park. We loaded the giant up onto the and drove him through Syracuse and put him on display on state in the atrium where he rests now. Following that, he'll go to the Children's Museum in Albany. He went to Albany after Syracuse. He'll go to the Skyline Gallery in New York City. He went to New York and was actually displayed across the street from P.T. Barnum's fake of a fake. So 2 of them were hucking giants at one point, really across the street from each other. And then he'll come swing back around for Lafayette Apple Festival's 40th anniversary next year, where we'll put him under a tent and ask for a $1 donation to see him. I'm trying to convince our Homer collaborators to set up a tent directly across the way from ours, and we'll kind of spoof on him. But that's footsteps away from where he was originally unearthed, which is the Lafayette Apple Festival grounds. After that, if he doesn't end up at the Onondaga Historical Association, he'll either be put out as a piece of public art in one of our parks, or he'll go in my garden. I'll plant some flowers around it.
We should bring him home to home.
We'll put him in your garage, Linda, like they used to. Yeah. Anyhow, thank you so much for having this reception. We've been in Homer throughout the day, and I couldn't have had a warmer reception throughout the day. Martin Sweeney and Kathy Beardsley were huge organizers. What we're hoping to do is create a collaboration regionally between Syracuse, Homer, and some of the other towns and villages in this area. For so long, we kind of all do our own thing, and maybe hear about something going on in Homer, or maybe hear about something going on in Syracuse. And me, Martin, and Kathy are kind of really dead set on continuing a collaboration between the regions. We think that regional history and art tourism is an important factor, and something that could actually draw people to our region in the summer. Maybe they stop in Homer first and stay and eat and shop, and then work their way up through Syracuse, and really the heart of central New York is what I like to say.
Is there a bed and breakfast here anywhere?
In Homer?
The Quagmire.
Quagmire over
Right.
281 is the closest to it. The last